capitalism. Money is the most important thing in a capitalist system, and we have budgets that say X percentage of
Let's see
your
here.
budget will actually go towards policing. So in New York City, there's
Okay.
that's 6 billion out of a $90 billion budget that goes towards policing.
Okay.
And
I'm gonna
you
have
know,
this just
for
in
us,
case
they
somebody come too
yeah, for us,
close.
they
I'll be
say that
like,
we
oh,
need more money
please,
to
excuse
protect
me.
children and actually get to them. So one of the things I
Let's
want to talk
listen.
about as we talk about defunding the police is that we often think about policing in terms of the police who are on the street, right? Like we think of the beat cops. And policing actually doesn't operate like that in our society, right? Like, or I should say, it's not the only way that policing operates in our society. So, one of the more egregious ways is that you can't have police, right? So, and here's a question. Juanita, I really appreciate you being here, being on camera, so I can keep going to you as my as like the Hudson Valley correspondent. Um, but when like what has so I know that in some parts of the state, for example, in Rochester, they actually just passed some laws back in June to get cops out of schools. Just want to get a sense of like what the
Uh, the thing about getting cops out of school, I would not agree. Getting cops out of schools, are you kidding me? I don't agree. Why would anybody want to get cops out of school? It's insane. It's totally insane. Talking about getting cops out of schools. Why wouldn't you want a police officer in your school protecting your children? That sounds weird as a mother freaker because we already have teachers, counselors, paraprofessionals, all types of people going into the school system. And I'm not lying. There's a lot of evidence. I'm not going to look it up to show anybody any proof. Everybody has the internet, and you can go and get archives of how many incidents were there with teachers fondling with children, like if these children are adults. You got people teaching children sexualities, uh, but they're not teaching them the responsibility of sexuality. It's fine and dandy to show a kid a condom and to say this is what you use just in case if you're going to have intercourse, be intimate with someone, but it's equally uh, fair to teach the children that you shouldn't be having intercourse because in reality nobody wants you to mess up your mind. Having intercourse, being intimate with someone, is very, very serious. That can cause you to get mental problems. For example, when me as a grown woman, me as a grown woman, if I was to get in an intimate relationship with a man, like I was, like almost 3 years ago now, 2 years ago, and things don't work out between us, that messes with my mind. So, why would somebody say that it's okay to teach the young people about using protection, but let's not teach them that it's a lot of responsibility with engaging in intimacy, which a lot of these young people do. Just because they see condoms and they see that adults are doing it, full blown adults are doing it, they feel that it's okay to do it, and it's not. I'm sorry, I cannot agree with that. I do not want the police out of the schools. That prison, that school to prison pipeline that people be complaining about, So tell us exactly what are we supposed to do with the disobedient children when sometimes their parents even come to the school in rage and wanting to fight? What are we supposed to do with those type of children that do have problems in the school system? What are we supposed to do when the parents don't even show up to a mandatory meeting? What are we supposed to do when the parent does not participate with the education of their child and or children? So all of this talking about the school prison pipeline is BS to me, because some people use that terminology to try to say basically it's law enforcement fault that the children are in the schools committing crimes. Now, if you really want to get deep into this, law enforcement is not the only institution that demoralize our children. The school system, look at this school across the street. It had a boiler over there for the past 3, 4 years. The school right here across the street. Can you see that boiler? That blue boiler right under the play area. There's a boiler. That boiler has been there for the school, in the school, for those children like that for the past 3, 4 years. So when you're talking about the justice system is the only issue, BS. Sorry. Sorry. Be better educated and knowing what you're talking about before you're listening to all of these other people saying different things and they barely know the half of anything. You got all these unprofessionals, all these lay people who don't participate in the government, but they want to go against the government. They have no structure. Where's this structure coming from? Come on, you can't run a place without structure. Sorry.
I would say there's definitely different communities in the region where there are cops in schools, right? And so the one of the places that sticks out to me right now that I believe is the beginning of a campaign around that is in Kingston, right? Where there's the question of how do we actually get cops out of our schools because it's not, like you said, right? It's like it's there's more harm as opposed to protection. Um, and I'm sure we'll probably talk about this too in some of the questions, but like I said, Kingston comes up to mind. I want to say I feel like Yonkers also has it in the schools, but again, could be wrong. And I'm saying that just because I haven't heard that as a big issue up this way. And I see Claudia said in Beacon, the middle school and the high school are right next to the prison and the correction officers. So they're not even in the schools, right? It's like physically located next to that. Hudson also has police in schools, right? So there's, like I said, there's certain municipalities within the region that where that's something along with Poughkeepsie.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and why we even talk about schools, right? Like because one, like schools are environments where young people have come to learn, right? They haven't come to get policed. And a lot of us have heard or are familiar with the term the school to prison pipeline. And the school to prison pipeline starts with cops in schools, right? Like you get and I should say any pipeline into incarceration starts with policing, right? Like we want to think of policing as the beginning of the criminal justice system, right? So the people and so if we want to stop people from getting sucked into other parts of the system, whether that's the courts, whether that's incarceration, whether that's reentry, we want to start with policing. And to that end, there's no reason for cops to be in schools, right? Like many school districts have more cops than guidance counselors, right? And there's actually a lot of information coming through. Someone just said in New Paltz, the police walk through the high school every day. No school resource officer. We're still a cop, right? Like no school resource officer, at least, but we don't need any cops in school because he gets targeted, right? Thank you. And because some of what we want to also be thinking critically about here is that as that police violence is targeted, right? Like, and I think we're in this amazing revolutionary moment where so many people are coming to the realization that police have an outsized power and outsized presence in our daily lives, right? And it's great that everyone's coming to those realizations. And we need to realize that part of the reason why people have to come to the realization is because everyone doesn't experience police violence the same way, right? Like you'll experience more police violence if you're Black, if you're Latinx, if you're differently abled, if you identify as trans or gender nonconforming, right? If you're Muslim, right? Like these aren't all the categories, but just to say that we need to understand targeting because that helps us understand how policing actually shows up in our communities. And a note that I'll make here in particular is that if you're a young person who is undocumented, you can get into a fight at school and end up getting deported, right? Because if you get into a fight at school,
I want to comment on the undocumented. First of all, you're absolutely right. If an undocumented individual was to get into trouble in school, most likely they're not going to want the police to come to the school. So that means also that the documented and born and raised, even Black person like me, who's Black, born and raised in America, I can use the undocumented individuals to commit my crimes because I'm protecting them by saying, I don't want the police at the school. Listen, just the other day, I had this conversation with someone. They were all fascinated with the undocumented, and so am I. I feel that no human being on the planet should be mistreated when this planet has bounty full of resources to provide for them. But some of you people are going overboard with protecting the undocumented who can and will and have done committed crimes. You was upset with President Trump when he said that the rapist criminals are coming into this country. You're upset with him because it's not necessarily that the documented and the natural born people here are going to be the ones committing the crimes. It's so unfair to even think about one of the reasons why you don't want police in your schools, because the police is going to come there and harass the undocumented and get them deported. Should that be a matter of you not sending the police to the schools to protect the children. And then another resolution to all of these problems is that for the undocumented to hurry up and have kids so that the government can say, oh, we're not going to kick you out of here uh, because of your kid. Come on, man. Some things people need to start thinking. Think, boy, blowing my mind with these ideas to protect people you don't even know. And maybe you do know them because those are your friends. Those are your family. Do you know, with me being an immigrant in this country, I can sponsor almost every single body in my family to come here, and they can be more undocumented, staying here, overstaying their visa, uh, coming into the country saying that it's just a visit, and all I gotta do is say, hey, that's my cousin, that's my aunt, that's my uncle. Are you kidding me? Some of you people are trying to turn this country into a lawless land, the same where it is, the way it is in all of these other colonized countries. In all of these other colonized countries, the crime is ridiculous. In America, especially the richest city of the entire world, is somewhat becoming just like these countries.
There are police officers in your school that
Even
could correct
worse. Worse.
process within the system. There's a possibility that you could lose your ability to listen, right? So when we talk about policing, right, like we've already talked about education, we've talked about immigration, right? Like policing is not an issue that's in a box that exists somewhere. Policing is an issue that's embedded in so many facets of our lives. Right? So then we want to move on to homeless services, right? So when it comes to homeless services, and I should say just more broadly that when we talk about cops and social services, we find policing and police officers being used to fill the gaps of social services, right? So we have the reason that we even have some of the reasons why we even have homeless people.
Okay, we want to, some of us, 3126. Let me comment. 3126. 31, 31, 31, 26. I want to briefly make a statement about the homeless. If the community claim that they want to take care of people and they want to protect their community, why don't they go to the homeless shelters and take care of the people that's in the homeless shelters? Because you're not trained, you're not trained to even deal with what law enforcement deals with and have to deal with. Why would you want to interfere with that? Who's going to be monitoring the community while the community does what it does? So I'm trying to figure out and trying to reason with reason. If the homeless people is homeless in the community, why can't the community take care of the homeless shelter and the homeless people? To me,
In
it's
our city is what's because because we don't have affordable housing, right? Like, so many people grow when we said like, what does safety look like? Housing came up over and over and over again. So it's like, great, we're not giving people housing. They become homeless, and then we arrest them, right? So there's a cycle here that we need to talk about. And Juanita, you want to add anything? Because y'all do so much amazing housing work in the Hudson Valley.
Yeah, I mean, you said it right. I mean, we see it more and more in the on the streets where we're doing a lot of organizing. And when you talked about police officers in social service buildings, like definitely like DSS and all of that, like that's the first thing you see when you walk in, right? So you're coming somewhere to get assistance, and like that's the first thing you see, and you know they're there to try to keep the peace or whatever, and not thinking about the reasons why people are like going to DSS and things of that nature. And then, like you said, because we're in this cycle of not having real affordable housing or buildings or apartments that are up to living standards and have to be evicted, that we see either individuals or families not being housed, and then, like someone said, right, they're criminalized for being poor. They're penalized for not having a place to live instead of actually filling the gaps and helping people.
Absolutely. And
Definitely. Yeah.
yeah, and thank you for lifting up that comment about criminalizing poverty. I have just a follow up question for you, which is we've started talking a lot recently about soft policing, which is like when people are policed within systems, not necessarily by police officers, but there's, policing is an institution outside of precincts, right? Like, so policing can be like, if I need to, like, for example, resource testing to get public benefits, for example, right? Like looking at your bank account, being like, oh, you have too much money in the bank, we won't give you services in ways that like disincentivize uh, poor people building wealth, right? So could you talk a little bit about just like soft policing that you see when it comes to housing?
So just say a little bit more about soft policing so I can think about it a little bit more. That's a new term, so that was new to me.
Yeah, yeah. I was like, is everybody's getting taught in here. Yeah. So when we talk about soft policing, we're talking about like it shows up a lot in social services when, for example, you're filling out a form, right? Like, so if I have to fill out a form for housing, and they either check my resources, they check references. If I get arrested, I lose my housing, right? Like, what are the ways in which the housing system makes it difficult for people to actually keep housing?
Yeah. No, I mean, so I mean, there definitely was a statewide law that was passed, source of income, right, where you can't discriminate against someone about how they would be able to pay their rent. But I want to say a few months ago, definitely before COVID, you would get people coming in saying that their landlord or someone that they're looking for an apartment, and they fill out the application, they're being asked about like their credit history, right? They're being asked like how in different ways that they've been able to circumvent the illegal way of asking, but trying to figure out ways how people are able to pay rent, and just seeing people being penalized if they have Section 8 or if they have assistance. Um, you know, definitely starting to see more questions around your criminal background and your history, right? So just figuring out all these different ways and not taking into account circumstances, situations, and what have you. It's just like check the box and then you're done, right? And then say, no one asks any follow-up questions on you're still not able to find the help that you need. I think Anthony's internet went out a little bit on us. So as she's coming back, what are some other ways that some of you that are watching this, right, have seen how policing has played a role in some of the communities that you live in, right? So we talked about police in schools. We're talking about police definitely at social service buildings. What are some other ways that you all are seeing police in your communities? And put that in the chat. Yes,
I'm going to comment on the way that I've been seeing police in my community. 3625. Can't answer that. Okay, so I've seen police in my community do a various of good things and sometimes not so good things, especially when it came to me and the responsibility of me being a mother. I had police tell me in the special victims unit in the Bronx when my daughter was only 14, 15 years old, they were butt naked. All these people on my camera. They were there were pictures of my 14, 15-year-old daughter butt naked. The special victims crime unit told me that if my daughter, who was only 14, 15 years old, if she did not want to press charges, that they could not press charges. And this is while she was in foster care, in the care of Administrative for Children's Services. Let's say this again. In the care of Administrative for Children's Services, my daughter, she hates when I talk about it, but I told even Administrative for Children's Services, before all of this happened, I warned them in many messages, including text messages. You have to remember the reason why I'm contacting you guys. I don't want people having sex with my daughters. They're Muslims. Administrative for Children's Services workers told me that foster care is not no place for children. In other words, I work for Administrative for Children's Services. We don't want your kids here because we're going to let people do stuff to your kids that we will not let people do to other people's kids, especially people of other races. What was done to my children? All of these facilities that ever was involved with me and my children should be shut down, including Administrative for Children's Services. They need to revamp the foster care system, because even in 2018, 2019, my daughter, who was having some severe problems, one of them at the time, she kept calling the police on me, and she's telling them that I have mental issues. They know nothing about my mental issues. They're asking me questions about my mental issues. Because she told them that I have mental issues, she told them I'd rather for y'all to take her to the hospital instead of jail. Within 36 hours, within 36 hours, NYPD took me to Mount Sinai psychiatric ward 5 times. Within 36 hours, 2018 into 2019, yes, they did. They came to my apartment to arrest me on false allegations at least 5 times. So they admit me. And you know what the police officers were telling me? That my word is not as good as my daughter's word, and she's only a teenager. Basically, so you wait until my kids become breeding and people having sex with my kids without my permission, then all of a sudden you want to lock me up in a psych ward and in jail. I ain't never been arrested before in my life, but one time when I had to defend myself against this bitch that put her hands on me, and I took a mini hammer and I banged that bitch head open. She had the hammer in my face. I took it from her and used what she had against me to bang that bitch. Yes, I did. I was arrested for that. For defending myself against a fucking crackhead. Okay? So, for 50 years, 54 years in my life, I ain't never been in no fucking trouble. But for the past 6 years, NYPD came to my apartment and arrested me 5 times while people are having sex with my daughters and still having sex with them. Even my daughter who's a lesbian, who was raped by lesbians, they don't like when I say it. Oh well, I'm telling the world so the world can watch. These people are having sex with kids that are mentally unstable. That's a crime within itself. What are these horny people are doing on top of these kids? I dare somebody talk about Black Lives Matters. Are you kidding me?